How do you replace a B-tier corporate mascot with a character that has somehow become equal parts beloved and derided? Well, you start by drawing a needle mouse. Sonic the Hedgehog was released for the Sega Genesis / Sega Mega Drive in June of 1991. Created by programmer Yuji Naka and designer Naoto Oshima, the game follows its titular character on a quest through 6 zones to save the animals of South Island from the nefarious Dr. Robotnik, as he tries to collect the 6, soon to be retconned to 7, Chaos Emeralds in order to harness their power for evil. Upon its release, Sonic the Hedgehog would go on to garner massive success and would quickly be established as the flagship title to beat on Sega's 16-bit hardware. Its formula would be iterated on in sequels released in the following years. It would go on to receive multiple cartoon adaptations in the 1990s alone, and it would even lead to Sonic becoming the first video game character to ever appear in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, though it would unfortunately end up popping and kind of fallen to the ground.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Simply put, Sonic was everywhere in the early 90s, and it started out with this very first game. 2021 marks the 30th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog's release on the Sega Genesis, and as such, I thought it would be a lot of fun to revisit this game, especially because the franchise and the character means so much to me. While some have come forward over the years saying that the classic Sonic games were never that good or that Sonic the Hedgehog is incredibly overrated, I respectfully disagree. Call it nostalgia or a poor and unrefined taste in games, but I think that the original Sonic the Hedgehog is a bang-up title. An imperfect and flawed one certainly, but a great game nonetheless. I grew up playing Sonic the Hedgehog on my family's Sega Genesis as a kid, and back then I thought it was the coolest thing ever. In fact, my affection for the Genesis-era Sonic games is pretty well documented. For starters, he's one of the few video game characters that I actually own merch for, and a couple of years ago, I got to deliver a monologue about why I loved the character for a screen test I was doing in a video game-themed web series. Unfortunately though, I didn't end up getting the gig, but the point still stands. Sonic is very much one of my favorite characters of all time. And while there's no denying my love for Sonic the Hedgehog, or as I like to call him, Sonic the Hedge Boy, I can't help but wonder whether or not his inaugural adventure is still worth playing today. Because if you ask me, Sonic the Hedgehog is a great game. But does it hold up? However, because this game has already been covered by just about everyone on YouTube in staggeringly great detail, I'm gonna try and approach things a little more differently than usual. Instead of just playing the original Genesis release, I'm going to be focusing on the Sega Ages version for the Nintendo Switch, which is my preferred way to play the game these days. I'm well aware of the incredible mobile port this game got several years ago, but I've always preferred my Sonic games in 4x3, and I also love the convenience of being able to easily play this game on my TV, as well as because of the inclusion of both Sonic Spin and Drop Dash, which I'll dive into in a bit later in the video. But before we continue, a quick question of the day. What is your desert island game? The game that you love so much that you would never see yourself getting bored of playing? For me, it has to be a version of Tetris. Whether it be the iconic Game Boy rendition, Tetris 99, or an older DOS take on the game, I just know that I could pass countless hours playing Tetris while I starved to death. Be sure to drop your answer to the question of the day over in the comments. I'd love to hear a bit about your desert island game and why you chose that game in particular. And with that out of the way, on with the video. Sonic the Hedgehog is a franchise best known for its speed, and upon entering the iconic Green Hill Zone, it's easy to see why. The game employs momentum-based platforming with incredible results, often allowing players to get launched into the air and bounce off of enemies like they're springs if you're moving fast enough. The first area is a literal playground for the player, who can use it as such in order to grow acquainted with the controls and physics. Fixating on the physics for a second, it's a huge part of what makes the Genesis Sonic games so good. If you compare this game with other mascot platformers from the era, you can see how this game's incredible sense of motion and weight make it so engaging. For example, a character like Bubsy the Bobcat may be able to move around about as fast as Sonic in his games, but doesn't feel as intuitive or fun, whereas things here are a lot smoother outside of moments of noticeable and pretty soul-crushing slowdown. I've been playing through Green Hill Zone regularly since I was 3 or 4, and in that time, I've never grown tired of it. In fact, I may even go as far as to say that Green Hill Zone is the perfect encapsulation of what a Sonic level should be. It's incredibly spacious and open-ended, allowing you to explore the stage and its multiple routes without getting trapped in too many samey areas or getting lost. On top of that, it establishes what I believe is another good precedent for Sonic level design, a relatively low difficulty that allows players to complete the level without much fuss if they're careful, but also allows them to blaze through the level quickly and make things a tiny bit harder in the process. If it sounds like I'm focusing in on Green Hill Zone too much, it's for good reason, as a number of other reviewers and players over the years have agreed that it's basically the high point of Sonic 1, and that everything that comes after it has a noticeable drop in quality. And unfortunately, they're right, though not to the extent that I think they make it out to be, especially when you bring the game's several upgraded re-releases into account. Once you beat Green Hill Zone, you're tasked with clearing Marble Zone, and you're exposed to what many consider Sonic's crucial flaw: waiting.
What do you normally do when I'm gone?
Wait for you to get back.
The game suddenly shifts from a speed-based platformer and becomes a more standard and corridored adventure. While it does occasionally return to the more open-ended and speed-based design of Green Hill Zone, such as in the delightfully pinballish Spring Yard Zone, a lot of the game plays out in a more methodical and typical fashion, forcing you to wait for platforms to move, wait for armored and spiked enemies to reveal their weak point, and avoiding traps that may as well be bottomless pits. At any rate, the shift in design philosophy is jarring to say the least, but I also think it's fairly tolerable. While I would have liked to keep things moving through these levels, I do kinda understand where Sega was coming from with this. After all, this was the first Sonic game. It's not like they knew what worked or didn't yet, and I can't really blame them for not wanting to fully commit to the design philosophy of something like Green Hill Zone. I mean, I do think it's kinda weird given how Green Hill Zone is as addictive as nicotine, but I get it. Decades after this game's initial release, it's easy to point at Sonic 2, 3, and Knuckles as being the games to play if you're looking for all Green Hill design all the time. Sonic 1, on the other hand, feels more unique because of these slower moments, even if they ultimately hurt the experience. I won't try and argue that these moments are great or anything, but I do at least need to acknowledge that Labyrinth Zone aside, they aren't that bad. They're heavy on traditional platformer elements, sure, but Sonic is a platformer, and as such, it actually does need those elements. Also, I was never that bothered by it during my most recent playthrough, in part due to the quality of life updates that the Spin Dash and Drop Dash made via the Sega Ages release. The Nintendo Switch's Sega Ages version of Sonic the Hedgehog adds the ability to perform the Spin Dash from Sonic 2 and the Drop Dash from Sonic Mania, two abilities that allow Sonic to blast off at full speed at nearly any given moment. While this port's developers at M2 probably only intended for these moves to be added as a way to bring Sonic 1 up to snuff with his sequels, it also serves as an incredible quality of life update that at best makes Sonic 1 funner than ever, and at worst completely breaks the game and undoes the design of its levels. For example, knowing where to use the Spin Dash in Marble Zone allows you to skip some of those marble riding segments. Is that a bad thing? Kinda. It goes against what these levels were designed for and makes them a bit more like something from Sonic 2 or 3, which is honestly a good thing like I mentioned earlier. Still, it's a welcome quality of life improvement, and I'm ultimately happy with its inclusion as it does improve the experience for newcomers and gives seasoned veterans a new way to experience the levels. One of the other things that I always hear about Sonic 1 is that its boss battles are way too easy. While I also consider this to be true about a lot of the boss battles in Sonic 2 or 3, I've also never been particularly bothered by this. I've always looked at boss battles in Sonic games as being more ceremonial than anything, and as also being more of a way to vary the gameplay as opposed to being a skill check for your reflexes and problem-solving skills. As for the boss designs themselves, they're nothing to write home about, but they're also charming in their own way. This could just be nostalgia talking though, and I won't refute the fact that it's kinda hard for me not to factor that in a bit, so your mileage on this game's design philosophy and boss battles may vary. There are also special stages that you can play through in order to score extra continues and one of the 6 Chaos Emeralds, which are required to get the game's good ending. It's fine. Special stages in subsequent Sonic games would prove to be a lot more fun, but this isn't all that bad for what it is, and it showcases a rotating stage gimmick that's equal parts cool and impressive for the Sega Genesis. I also dig the fish design in the background. But overall, this first Sonic game plays quite well, albeit nowhere near as well as I remembered it playing as a kid. It does feel like the first installment of a series at points though, suffering from more slowdown and moments of general bugginess than its follow-ups would, and suffering from fairly inconsistent level design philosophies. But now onto the visuals. Sonic the Hedgehog has to have one of my favorite video game art styles of all time. It was heavily influenced by early CGI, which means that everything feels angular and rigid. The use of color in this game is also stupendous. Being the first game in the series, you can really feel how unrestrained the team was when they came up with the locales of South Island. Spring Yard Zone feels like it's part of a seedy techno-metropolis, and the mountains in the background of the stage also make me imagine that it's located in the middle of a canyon of sorts. Likewise, Green Hill Zone takes place in open fields that have a checkerboard design everywhere and harshly polygonal trees. 30 years later, it's kinda easy to overlook all of this, but I imagine that this game had to have been really visually striking when it first came out, especially when it comes to Green Hill Zone, which has multiple layers of parallax scrolling and a bright, vibrant color palette. That's not to say that the other levels don't look good either though, it's just a bit clear that Green Hill Zone got a bit more time from the dev team. I also like how the game seems to take place over the course of a day, beginning in the morning or middle of an afternoon in Green Hill Zone, and gradually playing out until you're running through Starlight Zone at night. While it's a relatively minor detail that I honestly just noticed 20 or so years into playing this game, it does make for a nice bit of world building. And as for the character designs, they're all full of personality and a cutesy 80s charm that makes them a delight to look at. I've always loved the enemy designs from Sonic 1 in particular, as everything looks really cute and unthreatening in a way that reflects the fact that there are cute, innocent animals trapped inside of them that are in need of rescue. This is also done in other Sonic games, sure, but there's something about the enemy designs in this one specifically that really bring this idea home for me. I also think that the game's reliance on a CGI aesthetic helps bring home this idea that the beautiful scenery of South Island has been distorted and turned astray by Dr. Robotnik's antics. And musically, Sonic the Hedgehog bops. The music was done by Masato Nakamura, the bassist from the 80s and 90s J-pop band Dreams Come True. His contribution to the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise seriously can't go without enough praise because, and I kid you not, they're loaded with iconic and memorable melodies. Outside of the music for Labyrinth Zone, which is only alright, each of the game's tracks are top-notch 16-bit tunes. So much of the music in Sonic 1 feels celebratory and joyous to me, especially Starlight Zone. It's a running gag that Sonic games have always had good music in them, and with a first soundtrack as genuinely good and consistent as this one, it's easy to see why. I honestly don't have much that I can say about Sonic's music that hasn't been said already. But if you love the soundtrack to Sonic 1 and you want to hear more music like it, I highly recommend checking out the early discography of Dreams Come True. Their music is insanely catchy, and you can totally hear shades of Sonic-like music in it, especially in Nakamura's bass lines for the band. So does Sonic the Hedgehog hold up? I've already said that it's a great game, and you've heard me spend a bit of time gushing about it, so I think you already know the answer to that question.
Yes! 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 Yes!
While I'd be crazy not to agree with some of this game's detractors that it's a little rough around the edges and doesn't have as much going for it as its immediate sequels do, I still believe that this is a fantastic game with a lot of appeal left in it. It's one of the most iconic video games of all time for a reason. Sonic the Hedgehog's appeal is apparent from the opening moments of the game. The game's use of momentum and physics-based platforming is incredibly addictive and fun to goof around with. And while the game deviates from this type of gameplay as early as the second zone, it does return to it in great effect in later acts like Spring and Starlight Zone. Additionally, the presence of the spin dash and drop dash in the Sega Ages port help rectify the issue of slower gameplay and gives seasoned players new tools to enjoy the game. While Sonic 2 and 3 certainly refined what this game did right and trimmed the fat off of what it did wrong, I highly recommend this game to newcomers to the franchise. Would I recommend it as the first Sonic game to play? Probably not, as Sonic 2 offers, in my opinion, the definitive vintage Sonic experience, but I do think that this game somehow attained a worse reputation than it deserves over the years, and that it represents a very unique moment in Sega's history. So if you've never played Sonic the Hedgehog before and are thinking of giving his games a go, I highly recommend giving this game a shot at some point. It's an extremely common game that's been ported to a number of consoles over the years and is often available for anywhere from $5 to $10. It's also available for free on mobile in widescreen, albeit with ads. And with that said and done, that brings us to the end of today's video. If you haven't answered the question of the day yet and are feeling up to it, I'd love to hear what your desert island game is. On top of that, if you have any games that you'd love to hear my thoughts on in a future review, please feel free to let me know in the comments or over on Twitter or Instagram. You could check out my profile on both of those sites by following the link in the description or by searching for NichePlays on those respective apps. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that you have a good time playing Sonic 1 if you happen to give it a shot or just end up replaying it. So yeah, bye.